The webinar today will be presented by Catherine Wood and Ben Sharp from AXA XL. Catherine is a senior underwriter on the War, Terrorism and Political Violence team at AXA XL and has worked for AXA XL for 11 and a half years. Ben is an underwriting manager for crisis management and special risks, specialising in underwriting, war, terrorism and political violence, security risks and product recall coverages. Ben has worked in the Australian insurance market for 6 years, having previously worked in London, North America and Singapore. And I think, Ben, you said you worked at AXA XL for about 12 years. I'll now hand you over to Catherine and Ben to start the presentation.
Thank you, Christine. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this lunchtime. My name is Ben Sharp and joined with Catherine Wood here. AXA and Uni Mutual have a long-standing relationship across multiple lines of insurance, and we appreciate the opportunity to present to you our Active Assailant product that Uni Mutual has purchased for a number of years. So the agenda for the next half an hour or so will be the following. What does crisis management at AXA mean? The evolution of the terrorism market and Active Assailant product. We'll look at the policy triggers, what a loss typically looks like. Important highlights, what the product does not cover. Typical buyers of Active Assailants. We'll run through some global case studies and give you an introduction to SRM crisis consultants. SRM are our core global crisis consultant for all terrorism, Active Assailant and security risk policyholders. And as Christine mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for any questions at the end. I will say that when discussing Active Assailant with some real-life case studies, it is a hard subject to discuss. But what I want to demonstrate is that AXA have been writing this area for a long time and have a history of supporting clients when very tragically incidents do occur. So I'd just like to give you a brief overview of crisis management and special risks at AXA XL. The team is made up of 6 products with underwriting hubs in Asia Pacific, London, mainland Europe and North America. The 3 traditional crisis management insurance lines we underwrite are war, terrorism and political violence, which is where this Active Assailant product fits into. We offer security risks, so this would include kidnap and ransom, evacuation and crisis response insurances. And product recall, where typically we insure large food and beverage manufacturers for cost incurred and brand damage following a large recall event. The special risks aspect of our division can also be broken down into 3 very specialist areas. Sport and leisure, the first, typically insuring companies in the professional and amateur sports sector. Second is contingency, where we typically insure companies in the, or contingency would be kind of event cancellation and non-appearance at large events, usually in the music or sport industries. And film and media, which is bespoke insurances for production companies in the TV and film industry.
So before launching straight into Active Assailants, we thought it would just be good to go back and talk a bit about how the terrorism market was originally formed. We've had over 20 years of the conventional terrorism market, which came about after 9/11 when capacity was withdrawn by reinsurers from the property market. The market has then evolved over the years and new products have been created in response to the new style attacks that we've been seeing. Historically, we've been seeing big bomb style attacks, but improved security has made these large scale explosive device attacks more difficult to execute. And we're seeing a change to more lone wolf style attacks, which is fueled by the rise of ISIS, etc. This therefore created a grey area in terrorism policies, and therefore standalone Active Assailant policy was formed. So what are the differences between an Active Assailant policy and a terrorism policy? A standalone terrorism policy would not be expected to pay out in respect of recent assailant events that we've seen. A terrorism policy is only triggered by property damage, and cover is usually limited to damage, business interrupted, and very limited specified extra expenses. Active Assailant insurance extends the range of incidents, triggers, and costs covered, and applies regardless of whether the motive for the attack was terrorism or not. From school shootings to attacks on our city streets, active assailant incidents are sadly becoming ever more commonplace. The perpetrators vary widely, from domestic and foreign assailants to those with some distorted sense of revenge, and with their motives, methods, targets, and choice of weapons constantly evolving, attacks are pretty hard to predict. AXA XL offers specialist insurance, as Ben has briefly mentioned, and crisis management services to help organisations prepare for these complex, ever-changing threats and recover quickly if an incident does happen. What is an active assailant event? We would define an active assailant event as a premeditated, malicious physical attack carried out by an assailant who can be an armed individual or a group and armed with a handheld weapon. This weapon could be anything from a knife or a gun to an explosive device worn on the body, or a vehicle used as a ramming device, which we've seen in recent years, which causes damage and/or bodily injury or death and affects 3 or more people who are physically present during the attack. So what are we actually covering? If an assailant attack does occur on your premises or within 350 feet, it doesn't have to be your building that's specifically targeted, we will cover the cost of any damage to your property and any business interruption directly resulting from damage to the property, bodily injury or death caused by the assailant event, and any ingress/egress. We also cover some additional extra expenses to help your business manage and recover, and these include, but are very much not limited to, PR consultancy costs, so any assistance that you might need with crisis communications, engaging with media, any media training, and communication with your customers and suppliers. The first 24 to 48 hours are crucial in appearing to be in control of the situation. We'd look to cover relocation expenses, although admittedly this isn't too applicable these days to the education sector with remote working being available. We'd cover counselling costs to mitigate the adverse effects of the assailant event for any employee, visitor, customer, contractor, or student of the insured physically present during the event. And in today's world, with a huge focus on mental health and well-being, this sublimit and coverage is increasingly in focus. We'd also look to cover medical expenses, employee retraining costs, replacement employee recruitment costs, and any additional security costs to help mitigate the effects of an attack. It's also good to highlight we're very much open to discussing any extra expenses that you might be concerned about, which aren't currently listed or covered. We have existing clients where we've tailored their policy to cover extra expenses which aren't covered as standard. So to put the cover into some perspective here are some typical scenarios that we would be expecting to cover, with some examples taken from Australia and New Zealand. So a lone shooter or group scenario, one absolutely tragic example being the Lindt cafe attack that happened in December 2014, where a lone gunman held hostage 10 customers and 8 employees in the Lindt cafe here in Sydney. This then led to a 16-hour standoff after, when a gunshot was heard from inside, the police officers then stormed the building. They had thought he had a political motivation, but the eventual assessment was that the gunman was quite an unusual case. It was a rare mix of extremism, mental health problems, and just plain criminality. We'd also look to cover scenarios around disaffected employees or students. One example of this being in September 2023, a 25-year-old went to his workplace in Western Australia, a grain silo, and shot dead one of his colleagues. Police believe the shooting related to an incident between the 2 men. We'd also look to be covering school shootings, the incident in Perth in May last year being one example, which was more of an American style shooting. A 15-year-old had gained access to his father's gun cabinet, and he headed to a college in Perth's northern suburbs, where he fired a couple of shots, 2 of which hit some buildings. And as you can imagine, the school went into immediate lockdown as terrified staff and students hid in cupboards and under desks to avoid being shot. The teenager in question here was actually the first student to be jailed for carrying out a school shooting in Australia. Some other scenarios of far-right deluded loners and militars, an example here being the Christchurch mosque attacks in New Zealand in March 2019, which was 2 consecutive mass shootings in 2 mosques during Friday prayer, and the first attack was actually live streamed. And then random acts of extreme violence, and one quite fresh example of this is the tragic Westfield attack that we all know about. Exclusions. There are a couple of things that we wouldn't look to be covering within our policy. These include armed robbery, anything to do with sexual assault, strikes, riots and civil commotion. Although I think it's important to highlight here that if an assailant chose to target those present at a protest and there was therefore an assailant event, we would look to be covering this. We just don't want to be picking up scuffles, any threat or hoax, war, and anything to do with gang-related crime.
So let's take a look now at who are the typical clients and buyers of active assailant insurance. We have clients ranging from some of the world's largest stadium owners right across to a very remote rural warehouse business. Generally speaking, main buyers are businesses who have an increased footfall of customers through their premises. Sadly, attackers look for a high concentration of people with the aim of causing maximum human casualties. When this insurance product was first launched, there was a significant uptake, especially from the North American clients, who really established this market as a standalone insurance product. And this was typically as a result of the frequency of mass shooting events. Gradually, interest from corporate clients grew not just in the US, but all over the world. Severity and frequency of random attacks increased, and insurance brokers became more confident in better understanding the product and being able to discuss this with their clients. Here in Australia, we have a large domestic portfolio of these kind of typical type clients you see on the slide. And no surprise, since the Bondi Junction attack, we have seen an increase in demand for quotes in this space. So now we'd like to just run through a few case studies. Many of these you'll be aware of, but it's important to consider how random and devastating these attacks can be to a business, their staff, and their customers. One of the most significant events which really contributed to the evolution of the active assailant insurance market was the tragic shooting at the Bataclan in Paris. The attack, November 2015, on the Bataclan concert venue was one of a series of coordinated terrorist attacks which claimed the lives of 130 people and injured hundreds more. Whilst no active assailant attack can be called typical, the Bataclan massacre differs in a number of ways to the single shooter or lone wolf events more commonly seen in the US. In this case, 3 assailants were motivated by religious ideology and armed with automatic weapons and explosives. The initial attack, mistaken at the outset by many as pyrotechnics as part of the concert, lasted 20 minutes, during which the assailants reloaded their weapons several times and threw grenades into the crowd. Subsequently, the terrorists searched through the venue for survivors, fired at those attempting to escape, finally took hostages before briefly attempting to negotiate with police responders. The attack was finally brought to an end by police almost 3 hours after it had begun. Some concert goers were able to escape by using fire exits, others fled to the roof of the building where they were rescued by people in neighbouring buildings, or simply escaped by jumping from windows on the upper floors. This attack is a worst case scenario. Multiple militarized attackers, well armed, well organized, and set against a completely underprepared, densely populated civilian target. Another case study, this one in North America, October 2017. 64-year-old Stephen Paddock opened fire on the crowd attending the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip from his 32nd floor in the Mandalay Bay Hotel. He fired more than 1,000 rounds, killing 60 people, wounding at least 413. The ensuing panic brought the total number of injured to approximately 867. An hour later, he was found dead in his room from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The motive for the shooting is officially undetermined. Prior to the attack, Stephen Paddock brought 21 suitcases to his room over a 7-day period. Staff helped him with his suitcases. Room service and housekeeping had contact and entered Paddock's suite more than 10 times in the days leading up to the attack.
So just to go into 2 more of the case studies in a bit more detail. The Charles University attack in Prague in the Czech Republic. In December last year, a postgraduate history student opened fire towards streets from the 4th floor rooftop terrace of the university, sadly killing 14 people and injuring 22 more. In the days prior to this, he'd also shot dead a man and his daughter in some woods near the city, and he'd had killed his father. The motive behind these attacks is actually still unclear. Officials say that that was one of the deadliest attacks in modern Czech history. And then there was also the Moscow concert hall attack in March of this year. Interestingly, Russia has a history of being targeted by ISIS, key drivers behind this being Russia's military support in Syria and the close relationships with the Syrian and Iranian governments. At least 137 people were sadly killed in the attack. It was a Friday evening, it was a packed concert venue, and ISIS did claim responsibility for this.
And bringing this back to Australia and the risk environment, obviously, the Westfield attack, which we're all very familiar with. A while ago, I recently attended an Australian counter-terrorism presentation in Canberra. And what I found interesting was the government's 3 main areas of concern in respect of domestic terrorism. The first was a threat from returning fighters, being Australian nationals from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Of those who have returned, it's estimated around 75% were subsequently involved in activities of security concern. The second is homegrown lone actors, which is another key threat, whether affiliated with a group or not. ISIL, Al-Qaeda and associated groups are exerting an influence in Australia through propaganda flowing into the communities. This is increasing the risk of homegrown violent extremism, particularly by encouraging lone actor attacks, which is what we saw in April this year when a 16-year-old boy was arrested after a bishop, priest, churchgoers were attacked during Mass at the Good Shepherd Church, Sydney. And lastly, the extreme far right, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, nationalists targeting foreign and minority groups, particularly Muslims. Increased threat from Islamic extremism has caused hate propaganda and attacks from these right-wing groups. This exacerbates inter-community tensions and risks reinforcing Islamic terrorist recruitment propaganda. So we've discussed how the active assailant insurance policy works, and we've given an overview of the risk environment with some case studies. But crisis management policies are more than a simple insurance offering. They're all underpinned by giving our policyholders access to expert crisis consultants who are there to assist and support clients in the event of an incident. At AXA XL, we work exclusively with SRN.
Yeah, when it comes to our policies at AXA XL, and this isn't just active assailant, this also includes some of our other lines of business like kidnap and ransom. We are partnered, as Ben said, with SRM, who are our risk consultants. They split their expertise into 3 sections: intelligence, resilience, and response. Just to give you some background on SRM, they are headquartered in London and they have 9 offices globally. There is an SRM consultant who is based in Australia. A lot of these consultants are ex-police, ex-secret service, or they have military backgrounds, and their role is very much to support clients in the event of a crisis. A crisis can take many different forms. Outside of Active Assailant, on the K&R side, they're involved in things like negotiations in a hostage situation. They have a 24-hour hotline that all of our Active Assailant policies have access to, and we very much encourage all of our policyholders to incorporate this number into their crisis plans. When you phone, the call will be triaged and someone will assess the situation and continue to either remotely support or get boots on the ground. It's important to highlight that the consultant doesn't work for the insurance company. They're a resource for our clients, and they do have a lot of experience in handling global crises. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all very much for your time. Hopefully that's given you all a useful introduction to Active Assailant coverage. Please do let us know if there are any questions, and if you can't think of any now, please do channel them back through Uni Mutual. And Christine, please let us know if any questions have been raised throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Ben, we do have a question from our audience. Can you explain why gang-related violence would not be covered? This may spill onto a university campus.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, we can sort of maybe take this offline and sort of delve into sort of scenarios where we don't want to be giving the cover. But I guess if there are, I can see where that question comes from, but if there are sort of 2 gangs meeting up on a campus and therefore it is purely a gang-related assailant event between the 2 gangs, we wouldn't look to be covering that. But yeah, I mean, if there's sort of a specific scenario, that we're very much happy to take that offline and sort of give sort of a scenario where we would look to be covering it and where we wouldn't sort of think that that exclusion would be taking place.
So is there, with regards to accessing the SRM consultancy services, is there a cost for that?
So as part of the policy, post-incident SRM's work that they do is included in the policy. Yeah, we do have clients who like to access SRM for any pre-incident, and that's something which we can actually discuss with Uni Mutual later on. And typically clients who come to us or go to SRM directly for pre-incident work, the type of work which they're often asked to do is kind of, you put it into 2 buckets: prevention and preparation. On the prevention side, it could be kind of pre-incident work focusing on threat analysis, doing a security risk assessment on site, planning management. On the preparation aspect, it could be, developing emergency action planning, running simulation training exercises, which have been quite popular in the past. So they do have certainly the capabilities of all of this. But at the moment, the existing policy is very much leaning towards the post-incident services of the consultant.
Okay, we've got another question that's just come through. This relates more to whether persons may be caught on crossfire than, this was to do with the gang-related violence, but as you said, we'll take that. I suppose what the question was in terms of something might happen and someone might be in the way of a gang-related incident and be sort of caught in the crossfire of it. But is that something that you'd rather take offline and answer?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of give maybe a more comprehensive answer offline, because there are so many different scenarios that we can delve into, and which we're happy to.
No problem.
Just Sorry, just on that crossfire, we have had examples where there has been, an active assailant event, and the police have actually come in and tried to disarm the perpetrators, and there have been people caught in the crossfire, and the medical expenses and everything else as a result of the injuries that they sustained were actually picked up under the active assailant policy.
Okay. And with regards to active assailant and a terrorist act, so so both can apply. There can be a terrorist act, and then that could result in an active assailant protection being triggered.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And that answered her question. That answered the question about gang-related violence. Thanks for that. I mean, I'd say it's one of the things that it's important if there is an incident that is, as you said in your presentation, it's notified as soon as possible when that occurs, so you can become involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we've had some queries about the contacts to SRM, so we'll get those. We might get something together, maybe an FAQ on this, and include that information within that for members, so that there's some ability for members to be able to contact SRM and pass that information to their crisis management teams. So I think a lot of members now are thinking about how to deal with these type of incidents if they occur, and how they can look at their crisis management plans and ensure that they are appropriate for any of these type of incidents that might arise. So we will be getting that information together and passing that on to members.
Yeah, good to hear. Thanks, Christina. And yeah, certainly that 24-hour hotline SRM number, we would highly encourage all of our policyholders and clients to incorporate that phone number into their existing and new crisis management plans.
No, that's great. We'll definitely get that together and ensure that members have that information, so they can incorporate that into their plans. Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Catherine and Ben. That was a great presentation.